Let us now consider the prodigies of the Chaldeans. Eudoxus, who was a disciple of Plato, and, in the judgment of the greatest men, the first astronomer of his time, formed the opinion and committed it to writing that no credence should be given to the predictions of the Chaldeans in their calculation of a man's life from the day of his nativity. Panaetius, who was almost the only Stoic who rejects astrological prophecies, says that Archelaus and Cassander, the two principal astronomers of the age in which he himself lived, set no value on judicial astrology, though they were very celebrated for their learning in other parts of astronomy. Scylax of Halicarnassus, a great friend of Panaetius and a first-rate astronomer and chief magistrate of his own city, likewise rejected all the predictions of the Chaldeans. But to proceed merely on reason, omitting for the present the testimony of these witnesses. Those who put faith in the Chaldeans and their calculations of nativities and their various predictions argue in this manner. They affirm that in that circle of constellations which the Greeks term the zodiac, there resides a certain energy, of such a character that each portion of its circumference influences and modifies the surrounding heavens according to what stars are in those and the neighboring parts at each season, and that this energy is variously affected by those wandering stars which we call planets. But when they come into that portion of the circle in which is situated the rise of that star which appears anew, or into that which has anything in conjunction or harmony with it, they term it the true or quadrate aspect. And moreover, as there happen at every season of the year several astronomical revolutions owing to approximations and retirements of the stars which we see, which are affected by the power of the sun, they think it not merely probable but true that according to the temperature of the atmosphere at the time must be the animation and formation of children from their mother's womb, and that their genius, disposition, temper, constitution, behavior, fortune, and destiny through life depend on that. What an incredible insanity this is! For every error does not deserve the mere name of folly. The Stoic Diogenes grants that the Chaldeans possess the power of foreseeing certain events, to the limit, that is, of predicting what a child's disposition and his particular talent and ability are likely to be. But he denies that the other things which they profess can possibly be known. For instance, two twins may resemble each other in appearance, and yet their lives and fortunes may be entirely dissimilar. Procles and Eurysthenes, kings of the Lacedaemonians, were twin brethren, but they did not live the same number of years, for Procles died a year before his brother, and much excelled him in the glory of his actions. But I question whether even that portion of prophetic power which the worthy Diogenes concedes to the Chaldeans, by a sort of prevarication in argument, can be fairly ascribed to them. For, as according to them the birth of infants is regulated by the moon, and as the Chaldeans observe and take notice of the natal stars with which the moon happens to be in conjunction at the moment of a nativity, they are founding their judgment on the most fallacious evidence of their eyes, as to matters which they ought to behold by reason and intellect. For the science of mathematics with which they ought to be acquainted should teach them the comparative proximity of the moon to the earth, and its relative remoteness from the planets, Venus and Mercury, and especially from the sun, whose light it is supposed to borrow. And the other three intervals, those, namely, which separate the sun from Mars, and from Jupiter, and from Saturn, and the distance also between that and the heaven, which is the bound and limit of our universe, are infinite and immense. What influence, then, can such distant orbs transmit to the moon, or rather to the earth? Moreover, when these astrologers maintain, as they are bound to maintain, that all children that are born on the earth under the same planet and constellation, having the same signs of nativity, must experience the same destinies, they make an assertion which evinces the greatest ignorance of astronomy. For those circles which divide the heaven into hemispheres, circles which the Greeks call horizons and the Latins finientes, perpetually vary according to the spot from which they are drawn, and therefore the risings and settings of the stars appear to take place at different seasons to different races of men. If, then, the condition of the atmosphere is affected by the energy and virtue of the stars, sometimes in one way and sometimes in another, how can those children who are born at the same time in different climates be subject to the same starry influences in various quarters of the globe? For instance, in the country which we Romans inhabit, the dog star rises some days after the summer solstice, while among the troglodytae, a people of Africa, it is said to rise before it. So that if I were to grant that the heavenly influences have an effect upon all children who are born upon the earth, it would follow that all who are born at the same time in different regions of the earth must be born not with the same, but with different inclinations according to the different conditions of climate, which, however, they by no means admit. For they persist in maintaining that all children who are born at the same period have at their nativity the same astrological destinies allotted to them, whatever their native country may be. But what folly is it to imagine that while attending to swift motions and revolutions of heaven, we should take no notice of the changes of the atmosphere immediately around us, its weather, its winds, and rains, when weather differs so much even in the places which are nearest to one another, that there is often one weather at Tusculum and another at Rome, as is especially remarked by sailors who, after having doubled a cape, often find the greatest possible change in the wind. When the calmness or disturbed state of the weather is so variable, is it that part of a man in his senses to say that these circumstances have no effect on the births of his children happening at that moment, as indeed they have not? And yet to affirm that that subtle and indefinable thing which cannot be felt at all and can scarcely be comprehended, namely, the conjecture which arises from the moon and these stars, does affect the birth of children? What? Is it a slight error not to understand that by this system that energy of seminal principles which is of so much influence in begetting and procreating the child is utterly put out of sight? For who can help observing that the parents impress on their children, to a great extent, their own forms, manners, and features, and even gestures? Now, this could hardly happen if it were not the power and nature of the parents which was the efficient cause, but the condition of the moon and the temperature of the heavens. Why need I press the argument that those who are born at one time and at the same moment are dissimilar in their nature, their lives, and their circumstances? Besides, is there any doubt that many persons, though they were born with great bodily defects, are nevertheless afterwards cured of them, and set right by the self-corrective power of their nature, or by the attention of their nurses, or the skill of their physicians, or that many children have been born so tongue-tied that they cannot speak, and yet have been cured by the application of the knife? Many likewise, by meditation or exercise, have removed their natural infirmities. Thus Phalaris records that Demosthenes, when young, could not pronounce the letter R, but afterwards, by constant practice, he learned to articulate it perfectly. Now, if such defects had been occasioned by the influence of the stars, nothing could have altered them. Need I say more? Does not difference of situation make races of men different? It is easy enough to give a list of such instances, and to point out what differences exist between the Indians and the Persians, the Ethiopians and the Syrians, in respect both of their persons and characters, so as to present an incredible variety and dissimilarity. And this fact proves that the climate influences the nativities of men far more than the aspect of the moon and stars. For, though some pretend that the Chaldean astrologers have verified the nativities of children by calculations and experiments in the case of all the children who have been born for 470,000 years, this is a mistake. For had they been in the habit of doing so, they would have never given up the practice. But, as it is, no author remains who knows of such a thing being done now, or ever having been done. You see that I'm not using the arguments of Carneades, but those rather of Panaeteus, the chief of the Stoics. But answer me now this question. Were all those persons who were slain in the battle of Cannae born under the same constellation, as they met with one and the same end? Again, have those men who are singular in their genius and courage a separate, some peculiar star of their own too? For what moment is there in which a multitude of persons are not born? And yet, no one has ever been like Homer. And if the aspect of the stars and the state of the firmament influence the birth of every being, it should, by parity of reasoning, influence inanimate substances. Yet what can be more absurd than this? I grant indeed that Lucius Tarutius of Firma, my own personal friend and a man particularly well acquainted with the Chaldean astrology, traced back the nativity of our own city, Rome, to those equinoctial days of the Feast of Paulis in which Romulus is reported to have begun its foundations, and asserted that the moon was at this period in Libra, and on this discovery he hesitated not to pronounce the destinies of Rome. Oh, the mighty power of delusion! Is even the birthday of a city subject to the influence of the stars and the moon? Granting even that the condition of the heavens, when he draws his first breath, may influence the life of a child, does it follow that it can have any effect on brick and cement, of which a city is composed? Why need I say more? Such ideas as these are refuted every day. How many of these Chaldean prophecies do I remember being repeated to Pompey, Crassus, and to Caesar himself, according to which not one of these heroes was to die except in old age, in domestic felicity, and perfect renown. So that I wonder that any living man can yet believe in these impostors, whose predictions they see falsified daily by facts and results.